The Glinski Rebellion was a revolt in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania by an aristocratic group led by Prince Mikhail Glinski in 1508. It grew out of the rivalry between two nobility factions in the Grand Duchy during the last years of Grand Duke Alexander Jagiellon. The revolt started after Sigismund I, the new Grand Duke, decided to strip Glinski of his posts based on rumors spread by Jan Zabrzeziński, Glinski's personal enemy. After the failure to settle the dispute in the royal court, Glinski and his supporters rose in arms. The rebels swore their allegiance to Vasily III of Russia, who was waging a new war against Lithuania. After the rebels and the Russian supporters failed to achieve military victory, they were allowed to move to the Grand Duchy of Moscow with the movable property. The vast land possessions were confiscated. Origin and progress. Historical background. In the early 16th century, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania found itself in a difficult position. As a result of the Second War with Muscovy, the duchy lost about one-third of its territory. In addition, there were internal disagreements over the conclusion of a new union with the Kingdom of Poland. To become effective, the Union of Mielnik had to be ratified by the Lithuanian Seimas. Opponents of the union, among them Mikhail Glinski and even the Grand Duke Alexander, refused to approve the union during the 1505 Seimas in Brest. Supporters of the union wanted to expand their own political rights as the union greatly limited the power of the monarch and led to the elective monarchy. In February 1507, the Seimas in Vilnius decided to demand return of the territory lost in the previous war with Muscovy and dispatched an ambassador to Moscow with an ultimatum. The ambassador's failure was regarded as casus belli. Moscow acted first but, despite the delayed gathering of the Lithuanian troops, did not achieve any significant results. Military actions in the first phase of the war were rather passive and did not bring the desired result either of the parties' causes. During the last years of Grand Duke Alexander's reign, Mikhail Glinski wielded considerable influence at the court and held the important post of court-martial in 1500–06. The rapid growth of Glinski's influence troubled old Lithuanian aristocracy. The Radziwill family, Kęsgylos, and especially Jan Zabrzeziński, who became a personal enemy of Mikhail. As a trustee of the Grand Duke, Mikhail facilitated the rise of his relatives and of some other persons that strengthened his position. The ambassador of the German Emperor Sigismund von Herberstein set out the essence of the rebellion in his notes on Muscovite affairs. The cause of the quarrel between Mikhail and Jan Zabrzeziński, he thought, that former Trakai voivode Zabrzeziński ordered to beat up the servant of Glinski. When the servant was sent for oats for the royal horses in Trakai for a second time, Mikhail, who had a great influence on the Grand Duke, made sure that Zabrzeziński was deprived of two posts, including the voivodeship. Even though such deprivation of posts did not in common practice, Herberstein reports that despite the subsequent reconciliation and the fact that Jan Zabrzeziński retained his third post, Zabrzeziński held his anger on Glinski. According to the Polish historian Maciej Strychowski, who lived in the second half of the 16th century, and chronicle of the middle of the 16th century, known as Bychowiec Chronicle, the conflict between Glinski and Zabrzeziński began after Mikhail achieved dismissal of the leader vicegerent Yuri Ilyinich and the appointment on his place Andrei Drozdh. Mikhail's cousin, Yuri Ilyinich, complained about his rights violation to Council of Lords. The council, including its member Jan Zabrzeziński, supported Yuri and did not confirm the appointment, considering Drozdh as a simple man, and recalling the enthronement privilegium of Alexander that warrants dismissal only with the deprivation of the coat of arms. Alexander, angered by the disobedience, urged lords to the Brest-Simas, were ordered to imprison Ilyinich and demanded lords not appear on his eyes. Despite the chronicle's description and chronology, historians note that Zabrzeziński fell out of favor due to the fact he was an active supporter of the ratification of the Union, which was thwarted on the Brest-Simas. Krzysztof Petkiewicz states that in 1503 Glinski had already accused Zabrzeziński of plotting the assassination. On August 6, 1506, Glinski triumphed over the army of the Crimean Khan under the Klesk. On August 19, Grand Duke Alexander died. On the elections, Glinski supported Sigismund, Alexander's younger brother. However, under the influence of rumors spread by Zabrzeziński, Sigismund deprived Mikhail and his brothers Ivan and Vasily the posts. According to Herberstein, who called Glinski and Konstanty Ostrogsky two especially famous people of the Grand Duchy after the king's death, the hatred which had been buried in the mind of Ivan on account of having been deprived of his palatinate through his antagonist's influence, again awoke. The consequence was that the latter, with his accomplices and friends, was charged with treason to King Sigismund, who had succeeded Alexander, was slandered by certain of his rivals, and declared to be a traitor to his country. The Knese Michael, smarting under such an injury, often appealed to the king, and demanded that the cause should be equitably judged between himself and Zabrzeziński, declaring that he would then be able to clear himself from so heavy a charge, but finding that the king would not listen to his petition, he went over to Hungary to Vladislav, the king's brother. Thence he sent both letters and messengers to the king, imploring him to recognize his plea, but when he found that all his efforts were of no avail, Glinski appealed for assistance to the Czech and Hungarian King Vladislav II and to the Crimean Khan Mengli. Vladislav II sent to the Grand Duke Sigismund ambassadors asking for Glinski complete satisfaction. Mengli sent Sigismund a message demanding to restore Mikhail on the court-martial post and, in the case of non-fulfillment, threatened to break the brotherhood. In 1507, the Polish Chancellor Jan Zabrzeziński warned Glinski that he would never be safe because of the threat from the Lithuanian nobility. At the same time, Vice-Chancellor Maciej argued that Zabrzeziński intentionally incited Glinski to revolt, but, according to the American historian Stephen Christopher Rowe, Zabrzeziński always considered Zabrzeziński as the cause of all unrest under Sigismund's reign, believed he was a kind of evil genius. According to Herberstein, Glinski, incensed at the indignity offered him, he told the king that he should resent such infamous conduct, and that he himself would one day live to repent it. Glinski began to spread rumors that authorities intend to proselytize all Orthodox Christians to Catholicism and refused will be executed, albeit Mikhail himself was a Catholic. As a proof he relied on the statement of Fyodor Kolentev, who allegedly received information from the Ivan Sapieha. Later, being under oath, Kolentev denied that says something like this to Glinski. According to the observation of Russian historian Mikhail Krom, Prince Glinski wasn't sincere in his statements. Thus, in 1509, remaining a Catholic, Glinski reported in a letter to Emperor Maximilian that prefers not to declare his true faith until won't achieve the return of the former position, and due to this he asks the Emperor, the Roman Church and every Catholic for forgiveness, taking advantage of the departure of Sigismund to the Simas in Krakow. Glinski gathered his brothers and friends, and told them about his intentions. For the spies he had known that his enemy Jan Zabrzeziński is in his manor near Grodno. On February 2, 1508, Glinski with a cohort of 700 riders crossed the Neman and surrounded the manor. Then Glinski's friend German Schlienitz broke with the people into the manor. Zabrzeziński was caught out of bed and beheaded on the orders of Glinski by an unnamed Muslim. It was the beginning of the rebellion. Having dealt with his main enemy, Glinski, who according to Strykovsky had 2,000 soldiers, sent units throughout Lithuania and made an attempt to conquer the Kaunas castle. On the 21st of February, Great Duke Sigismund sent a letter to the Crimean Khan with an eye to embroil Glinski with him. The point is that Mengli-Jaray's greatest enemy, Great Horde Khan Sheikh Ahmed, was imprisoned in the Kaunas castle and, as Sigismund states, Glinski intends to release him. After the failure with Kaunas castle capturing, Glinski moved to Novorodik and then went to Vilnius. But, after he had learned that the city is already prepared for the defense, he moved back to his main estate, Turów. Being in Turów, Mikhail negotiated with Great Duke Sigismund, who at the time was in Kraków, and with the Council of Lords in Vilnius. Great Duke sent to Turów his man Jan Kostovich. Kostovich handed to Glinski the Grand Duke's promise to resolve his conflict with the lords, but the Glinski family didn't trust the Grand Duke's envoy. They instead insisted to send to Turów one of the most influential Lithuanian noble, Albertas Gostautas, and stated they will wait for his arrival until March 12. It is not entirely clear when the Glinski family began negotiations with Moscow. According to Herberstein, Wopovsky, Strykovsky and the Lithuanian and Samogitian Chronicle, an initiative to start negotiations with the of Moscow came from the Glinski family, who even before the murder of Zabrzeziński sent a messenger with a letter to the Grand Duke. Justice Ludwig Diege's Chronicle dates this to the time after the murder. This version is supported by the fact that Glinski's negotiations Moscow is not mentioned in the Sigismund's letter to Mengli-Jaray dated February 21, 1508. In a letter to Vasily III, Mikhail Glinski wrote that he will take the oath to Moscow if Vasily issue a charter granting protection of his estates and property. Glinski agreed to serve with all the fortresses, which he already owns and which he will be able to take by force or persuasion. Vasily III, who've heard a lot about the abilities of Prince, accepted the offer and sent a made-up the best way possible agreement charter to the Glinski. Russian historian Mikhail Krom, taking into account the discrepancy between sources, dates the arrival of Mikhail's envoy to Moscow to March 1508. Russian Vremenik, a highly detailed source regarding the rebellion progress with a protograph created in the middle of the 16th century, contains a different version of the events. The unknown author points to the fact that negotiations were initiated not by Mikhail, but Vasily III himself. This source reports about the Moscow envoy Mytuguba Moklakov arrival to the Glinski family with a charter of invitation to the service of Vasily III with their ancestral lands. The Glinski's brothers didn't wait for a response from Great Duke Sigismund and sent the man Ivan Priezhsky to Moscow with charters asking to take them into Moscow service and to defend them and their estates. And the Moscow service, after sending the envoy, Glinski moved to Mazia, where his cousin Jakub Ivashchentsov served as vicegerent. Probably for this reason the city was surrendered by Ivashchentsov without any resistance. According to Bernard Wopovsky, in Mazia Mikhail Glinski was solemnly greeted by the Orthodox clergy. At this time the Crimean ambassador Hosiash Mirza came to the Glinski family with a proposal to move under the Mengli-Jaray service. Crimean ambassador promised to the princes Kiev with the surrounding lands. Glinski rejected this offer, probably due to the fact that Moklakov already brought a response from Vasily III. The Grand Prince of Moscow took the Glinski family to the service and promised to give them all the cities that will be taken in Lithuania. He notified about the sending aid with voivodes Vasily Shemyajich, Ivan Odoevsky, Andrei and Semyon Trubetskoy, Ivan Rybny-Obolensky, Ivan Vorotinsky, Andrei Saburov, Alexander Olenka and many other of his commanders with many people. Glinski and the supporters, most of whom were the relatives who served them, took the oath to Vasily III in front of Moklakov. Glinski's defection turned the nature of the rebellion from the internal Lithuanian affair to an episode of the Lithuanian-Russian War. This was probably a good conjuncture for Vasily III, who wanted to change the course of the war, because before that the war was not too well for Moscow. Information about the course of the rebellion after the Mazia taking is fully contradictory. According to Mikhail Krom, there is a huge discrepancy between information from the earlier and from the later sources. He regards as faithful descriptions of events of spring-summer 1508 from the chronicles of Decius and Wapovsky, for the Russian Vremenikan from the Sigismund's and Mikhail's letters. According to these sources, the rebel units have not taken any cities except Mazia. While in the later sources, Strykovsky, Bielski's and Lithuanian chronicles, Glinski attributed taking Turov, Orsha, Krikor and Gomel, although it is exactly known that Turov was the originally Mikhail's possession and Gomel belonged to Moscow since 1500. According to Strykovsky, while Mikhail tried to capture Klesk and Gomel, his brother Vasily operated in the Kyiv region. Vasily allegedly unsuccessfully besieged Zhytomyr and Overuk and urged the local Orthodox nobility to join the rebellion, promising that when Mikhail becomes the Grand Duke, he will revive the Kiev monarchy. From other sources we know only that the rebel units were in the Kyiv region. The evidence is Lev Tishkevich's appeal to the Grand Duke issued on June 7, 1508. Tishkevich complained that Glinski had ravaged his estate near Kiev. In June 1508 the Moscow troops began to come from the different directions. On June 11 Mikhail Glinski moved from Klesk to Minsk, with the Dmitry Zhizhemsky's detachment had been sent previously. At the same time Vasily Shemyajich's troops came to Minsk from Babruisk. The joint siege of Minsk has begun. It lasted for 2 weeks and ended in failure. Even Mikhail wrote in his letter to Vasily III that the city garrison was only 30 soldiers and there were very few people in the city. After the siege failure, Glinski moved to Borisov, where operated up to the Lithuanian troops coming. Mikhail Glinski's units operated over the large areas. They reached Vilnius and Novgorod, where joined with the Moscow troops of voivodes Andrei Trubetskoy and Andrei Lukomsky. Meanwhile, Lithuanian troops did not resist the rebels. There were only rumors that the lords were in leader and moved to Novgorod, and the king allegedly moved from Poles to Brest. On the 12th of June, Prince Angridros Hdzh with troops was sent to Slutsk. After the failed attempt to capture Slutsk, Dros Hdzh moved to Kapl and besieged the town. But this siege was also unsuccessful. According to Strykovsky, although this is contrary to the Mikhail's letter to Vasily III, Slutsk was besieging by Mikhail himself. Strykovsky noted the legend that, being unmarried, Glinski intended to force the widow Princess Anastasia of Slutsk to marry him. This would give him an opportunity to claim the Kiev monarchy throne, as Slutsk princes descended from Kievan Prince Olelko Vladimirovich. One of the few rebel successors was besieged princes of Drusk joining to the rebellion. From Drusk, Shemyajich's and Glinski's forces, as well as Shkenya's troops, retreated to Orsha. They fired the city from cannons, but without any harm. In mid-July, Lithuanian forces under the leadership of Konstanty Ostrogsky came to Orsha. Both armies stood opposite each other from 13 to the 22nd of July, but did not dare to start the battle. After removing the siege of Orsha, Moscow troops moved to Mstislav, ravaged the neighborhood and then retreated to Vyazma. Glinski and his supporters retreated to Starodub, belonging to the Grand Prince of Moscow. Fading and outcomes. From Starodub, the Glinskis moved in Pochep, where Mikhail left his supporters and the treasury with Princes Dmitry Zhizhemsky, Ivan Ozeretsky and Andrei Lukomsky, and went to the Grand Prince in Moscow. In Moscow, Mikhail hoped to ask Vasily III for military support. Grand Prince Vasily III bestowed on Glinski Maloyaroslavets, Medn and villages near Moscow and made other gifts. Then Vasily III let him go back to his own estates in Grand Duchy of Lithuania and sent Voivode Vasily Nesvitsky with the people along with many Peshorniks in support. On returning in Mazia, Mikhail wanted to continue the struggle, but on October 8, Russian-Lithuanian peace negotiations led to the signing of perpetual peace. The peace condition was a returning to the pre-war situation and the Lithuanian recognition of Moscow gains of previous wars. Princes Glinskis and the supporters were given the right to go to Moscow with all movable property. The vast land possessions of the rebels in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania were subject to confiscation, although Sigismund I began to distribute them to his people back in April 1508. The main Mikhail's estate, Turov, was granted to Prince Konstanty Ostrogsky. At the end of 1508, Mikhail Glinski moved to Moscow, where he received Maloyaroslavets as a fiefdom and Borosk in Komleny. Medn was granted to Ivan Glinski. According to historian Mikhail Krum, the rebellion route Poche shows that Glinski had no plan of warfare and rushed from one shady enterprise to another. Minsk events show that Glinski had any significant military force. The main Glinski's goal, to return the high position in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, was not achieved. Rebels. The real size of the rebel forces is unknown. Strykovsky noted that at the beginning of the rebellion, Glinskis had 2,000 soldiers. According to the Lithuanian and Samogitian Chronicle, they had 3,000 horsemen. Historical sources contain information about 52 rebels, and at least 26 of them belonged to the Glinski family, were the relatives, retainers or clients. The 11 princes are mentioned in the Russian Vrenmenik among those who went with Mikhail to Moscow. 5 of them were from the Glinski family. 3 brothers, Ivan, Vasily and Mikhail himself, as well as Dmitry and Ivan Glinski. 2 of these 11 were Dmitry and Vasily Zhizhemsky. The remaining 4 princes were Ivan Kozlovsky, Vasily Muncha, Ivan Ozeretsky and Andrei Drotsky. The rest of the rebels mentioned in the Russian Vrenmenik were entitled persons: Mikhail's cousins Andrei Drozdzdz, Pyotr Drozdzdz and Jakub Ivashchentsov, Semyon Alexandrov with children Mikhail and Boris, Mikhail Gagin, Deacon Nikolsky, brothers Pyotr and Fyodor Furs, Ivan Matov, Sviatosha, Domenia, Ismailo Turov, Voyniatskovich and 3 Mikhail's retainers formed the Krygin family. According to Alexander Zimin, in Muscovy most of them formed a special society corporation known as Litvov or Avaya. Evaluation. The evaluation of the Glinski Rebellion is controversial. In scientific literature of the late 19th, early 20th centuries, there is a discrepancy between different approaches to the understanding of the rebellion essence as well as the individual facts. Historians Volodymyr Antonovich, Matvey Lyubovsky, Mikhailo Rushevsky and Mitrofan Dovnar Zapolsky, although pointed to the rebellion narrowness, described the rebellion as a struggle between Russian and Lithuanian origins in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and his unorthodox Christians' struggle against the Catholic proselytism. Athanasi Yaroshevich, who considered the rebellion as the great disorder of the masses and as all-Russian affair, but this evaluation caused serious objections from Lubovsky. Meanwhile, Polish historians Ludwik Finkel, Oskar Halecki, Ludwik Kolankowski, as well as the Russian historian Alexander Presnyakov, denied the ethnic and religious nature of the rebellion and considered the actions of Mikhail Glinski as a shady enterprise, supported by dependent people only. In Soviet historiography, the concept has been put forward by historian Anatoly Kuznetsov as prevail. In its fundamentals, this concept repeats approach proposed by Yaroshevich. The Glinski Rebellion is considered as the revolt of the masses, aimed at the Russian people liberation from the authority of Catholic Lithuania. A prominent Soviet historian, Alexander Zimin, though adhered to this approach, added some significant adjustments. Zimin believed that people sympathized with the idea of rebellion, but princes did not want to use the popular movement of Belarusians and Ukrainians for a unification with Russia, and that fact led to the uprising failure. Another influential Soviet historian, Boris Floria, noted that the population didn't support not only the rebellion, but even the overall unifying policy of the Russian state in the 16th century. He believed this was caused by feudal lords who pursued their own interests and substantially took the anti-national position. The situation has changed after the Soviet Union collapse. In 1992, Russian historian Mikhail Krom published his paper in which he completely rejected the Yaroshevich-Kuznetsov concept. Krom considered the rebellion as the shady enterprise caused by the Mikhail and his brothers' desire to regain a lost position. He came to the conclusion that the majority of Orthodox princes were satisfied with the situation in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and they did not strive to separate. Mikhail Krom noted that in the early sources there are no ethnic or religious events connotation. This connotation appears only in the writings of the late 60th-90th of the 16th century, when ethnic and interconfessional differences in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania sharply worsened and the past was reinterpreted in the form of Orthodoxy Catholicism confrontation. Any ethnic or religious underlying reason of the rebellion is also rejected by the American historian Stephen Christopher Roell, who pointed that Glinski supporters was only his relatives and clients, and the rebellion itself was a gamble in the sense that any plan did not exist and the actions have different purposes. Stephen Roell believed that Glinski opposed not to the monarch whose vassal he considered himself during the beginning of the rebellion, but directly against Zabrzeziński and his supporters. Polish historian Jan Tegowski saw causes of the rebellion in the absence of family ties of the Glinski family with the state elites represented by Radziwiłł, Zabrzeziński, Kiska and Kezgaya. This caused disagreement between Mikhail and Jan Zabrzeziński and between Mikhail and the Council of Lords as a whole, according to Belarusian historian Makishny. In the early 16th century in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania didn't exist political groupings made up by ethno-religious basis. The cause of the Glinski uprising was the confrontation between Mikhail and Jan Zabrzeziński on different economic and political issues, as well as the reluctance of the Grand Duke Sigismund to resolve the case in court and his decision to strip Mikhail and his brothers of their posts. Belarusian historian considered the rebellion itself as spontaneous, aimed at achieving Glinski's personal goals, and that he had no specific socio-political ideas.